That was a lot. Just the gospel alone was a lot. But I'm going to pick one word out of that, like from an eyedropper. And I'm going to focus on that one. And that's the moment where it says that Jesus sighed. Now, a sigh is an interesting thing because it's an expression of emotion. It's a release of emotion. But is it a positive emotion or a negative one? You can sigh for so many reasons. And what all it is on the face of it is it's just a heavy exhale, right? Usually lowering the shoulders. But why? When we sigh, why do we sigh? So let's try it together right now, because there's a couple of steps to sighing. You can't have a heavy exhale until you've had a big inhale, right? So if we inhale together, we exhale together, lower our shoulders. There's one other thing that comes with a sigh, and that's usually a vocalization, right? It can vary too. But I just want you to feel it the way that you feel it right now, and we're going to inhale together, and then we're going to sigh, okay? So here we go. Now, if you're listening to yourself, you might have heard kind of a high-pitched vocalization. That's probably a positive emotion. That's an expression of relief, right? Or you've been cooped inside all day, and you come outside and you smell the fresh air, and it's this is great. Or it's been 100 degrees and 2,000% humidity all summer, and you walk outside and you're like, this is wonderful. Or you might have heard yourself vocalize in a little bit lower register. Right? Maybe a growl or a groan. I don't have to tell you, that's probably a negative emotion. That's probably frustration. You know, you've tried it so many times, or the printer in the office won't turn on and you don't know what's happening. You're like, and then it turns out the plug is just out in the back and has to be pushed back in. True story. Yeah, just happened. But sometimes before you can figure that out, you have to take that moment of like, this thing again, right? We need that. We need to let go of that. And I wonder what kind of sigh Jesus sighed. It doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us exactly how he was feeling. It's hard to know. Is this like, these faithless people, or why aren't they getting it? Or maybe it's this sigh of relief that feeling the Spirit come into him to give him the power for healing. Here it is. Here's the healing. We don't really know. But we ought to give ourselves a chance to know what is happening in us. We have all the context, don't we? When we sigh with relief, we sigh with frustration. Sometimes we find that after we have breathed in and breathed out intentionally, we realize we've been holding our breath for a while. That's me. You can breathe shallowly all day long, and the higher the stress, the shallower those breaths get. And when you actually fill up your lungs and empty them again, you're like, oh, I have not really been breathing all day long. So, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with the band Mumford & Sons. A few people, Rick is, he's all over this. They have, one of their hit songs was called Sigh No More. And maybe that jumped into your head right away as we started talking about sighing. And in fact, it's the song they named the album after. The album is Sigh No More. And I had to do a little research, but I discovered that it's based on a poem by Shakespeare, also titled Sigh No More. And they borrow a lot of the lyrics from the poem. And so the Shakespeare poem goes like this. It says, sigh no more, ladies. So it's addressed to women in general, I suppose. Sigh no more, ladies, sigh no more. Men were deceivers ever. 1 foot in sea and 1 on shore, to one thing constant never. Then sigh not so, but let them go. And I assume them means men in this poem. Let them go. I think there was a Disney song something different. Not the same. Sigh not so, but let them go. This is a negative sigh, isn't it? This is these men, these lying, deceiving men. I'm so sick of this. It's that growling sigh of frustration. And so Shakespeare is urging them to quit letting those guys get them down. Quit letting the rotten behavior of the people around you bring you down. Let those people go. Enjoy your life. Find a way to enjoy your life and don't let them bother you. So what was Jesus thinking when he sighed? Was it one of those? Was it one of those just release, let it go, don't worry about those people anymore kind of a sigh? What was it? But I think in order to look at this, we have to be looking at the humanity of Jesus. And that's something I try to emphasize whenever I can. We, in all of our songs and our theology and doctrine and liturgy, we tend to put Jesus at the very center as the Son of God, fully God, right? And as well we should, and that's good. But sometimes we lose track of Jesus' humanity. And my hope is that when we read the Gospels, we let that come back to us, that Jesus walked with his feet. Jesus wept with his eyes and his heart. And Jesus sighed. It's his humanity. He is one of us, and he knows what it's like to have human lungs that may have forgotten to breathe all day long until this moment. And this topic reminds me of a new friend of mine named Connor. Connor Link he's a rock climber and a rock climbing instructor and a life coach. And he kind of weaves those two things together, the climbing coaching and the life coaching. And as such, he has a book that he's putting out that focuses on an acronym, BRAVE, B-R-A-V-E. And you may have noticed I referenced the word brave in my newsletter on Friday. But for him, like I said, it's an acronym. It's B-R-A-V-E. B is for breathe. A good first step for literally anything you want to do, breathe. But he says in his book, with each inhale, we are exploring the vastness of possibility. When we start with a breath, we are opening ourselves up to what's universal, to everything that's out there. We're not putting on these blinders and closing off to only what we know or understand. We're open. And then R is release. And there's the sighing. There's the sighing we just did together. He asks, what stories are you currently telling yourself about yourself? And are they true? Maybe we need to release those. Maybe in our sighing, we need to let go of those stories and find some new ones. And he says, remember, we aren't releasing ourselves from who we are and how we're feeling. We don't reject or deny our identity or our emotional state. We release ourselves into who we are and how we're feeling. Because if we've been telling those stories, those false narratives we've been weaving around ourselves, then to release is to let go of those and to rediscover ourselves. Then A, B-R-A, A is allow. And he says this is an invitation to dream, to notice the enormity of God's love for us and the vastness of possibilities of life when we allow for it. God has infinite resources, so often just waiting for us until we ask. And the V is visualize. We shift from the vastness to the specificity. Remember, I mentioned the universality of the breath. We're opening ourselves up to everything that's possible. With God, all things are possible. But to visualize asks us to shift from all things are possible to this thing is possible. To name it. What is in front of us right now that feels impossible? To visualize is to say this right here is possible. And then we move on to E, which is express. And there is some fear in this step that he describes. This is where we sometimes hit that roadblock. and say, I'm afraid to take that step. For him in the rock climbing, it's, I see that handhold there. I know I can reach it, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid to fall. And he told me personally about what he does when he, in those moments sometimes when he's high up and he doesn't know if that's going to work, and he's afraid of falling, but he's got support, right? He's got somebody, he's got a belay down there ready to catch him as soon as he falls. Up here somewhere, he knows that, maybe in his frontal cortex, he knows he's safe, but there's a reptile brain back here that says, no. If I fall, I'm a goner. So you know what he does? He falls. He'll take an intentional fall to train his root brain that he's okay. So that next time he's in that exact place and that fear comes up and says, no, you can't do that, because if you do that, you might fall and you might die. He's already had that experience. He knows he's going to be okay. And none of us are going to go out after church and go rock climbing and apply this lesson that I just... But how often is that the case for the choices we make in our own lives? I've never failed from this before, so it's better I don't try it. Give yourself the opportunity to realize your support, to know who's back there holding that rope and who's got you when you fall. Hopefully we see some of those people in this room who have your rope, who have your back. And we have that fear of letting go of the stories that we've used to define us and to bring us comfort, even if there's negative stories. Sometimes, if they give us an identity, they make us feel a little better because we know who we are. Even if we don't like who we are, we'll hold on to those identities and those stories. But when it's time to let go of them, it can seem impossible unless we have done the steps leading up to it. Once we have breathed, once we have released, once we have allowed, and once we've visualized, then we should be ready to express, to take that step. And I feel like we need to sigh together one more time, okay? So let's... Okay, now do it with your eyes closed. Now open your eyes. Does the world look a little bit different after you've used your lungs, after you've breathed a few times? I think maybe it did for Jesus, too. Regardless of whether Jesus sighing was positive or negative, I think it's an important stage in our lives because we try to imagine that we can do all the steps at once. We know that life has many steps, and everything on our task list that we're trying to get done, there's steps to it. There's step 1, step 2, step 3, but we think we can just kind of dive in and tackle it. But we are not made that way as humans. We are made to take one step at a time, and sometimes those don't even overlap. I'd say often they don't overlap, which is why we don't give ourselves the opportunity to breathe, to sigh, because we feel like we're wasting time. We just need to get on with it. And I think that's what Jesus was doing. He was taking that moment so that he could look at life again a little differently than he did before, to not skip over that step, that moment. And there is a lot to sigh about, too, isn't there? When you look at the world, when you look at our lives, when you look at a printer that won't turn on. I spoke with a woman at the pantry on Wednesday who just a month or two prior had a granddaughter who was murdered, who left 5 children behind. I didn't have any answers for her, but we sighed together. And you look out in the world and you read the reading like we had from James this morning. And when you read that and you hear that, does that remind you of the world that surrounds you, the world you observe, of the wealthy running the show and the under-resourced, always getting the short end of the stick? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Do you guys see that in the world when you look around? Yeah, James saw it. James didn't like it. And so you feel James's sigh in his writing, in his letter, and this sense that it's not right and we need to sit with this because we're supposed to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Because faith without works is dead. When we spend all our time being religious and none of our time actually carrying that love out to the world, then what we do here is dead. It's useless. So we listen carefully to James, the brother of Jesus, showing us what perfect love is. And then what do? We move on to the gospel reading, and whoops, what is that about? Jesus and this Syrophoenician woman, this Gentile woman who needs his help, who's desperate for his help. And she comes to him, and what does he say? He says, sorry, you're not eligible. Jesus treating an outsider like an outsider. That does not fit with how we see Jesus or how we want to see Jesus, is it? And there's books that have been written, books and books and books, about just this one scene. So we're not going to solve it this morning. But we can ask some of those same questions that we've been asking about the sign. What is going on in Jesus in this moment? Is he testing her faith to see what she'll say? Maybe. Or is Jesus learning himself too? Is he in a learning process and waiting for a woman like this Syrophoenician woman, to come and be his teacher in this moment so that he can learn more completely what love is? Maybe. It's ambiguous. But the gospel's supposed to be clear, right? Not murky. And here we have this very confusing passage, and it's just really frustrating, right? So what should I do right now? I'm feeling very frustrated. Maybe. That was a low pitch. I don't want that passage in the gospel. It's hard. So we sigh through it, and we sigh together through it. And when we look at the examples of sighing that we've seen this morning, and we look at Shakespeare's poem, Sigh No More, and Mumford & Sons' song called Sigh No More, and the title that's called Sigh No More, it's like we're addressing this sighing as negative and only negative. But even when it expresses a negative emotion, even when we're frustrated and we have to get that out and we don't want to be frustrated, to say sigh no more, I feel like is to ignore that. Maybe instead of leaning into what Shakespeare is telling us, we should be pointed in the opposite direction. Because when we sigh, we take that moment to center ourselves, to recognize where we're at, what we're feeling, and to really see our way forward. So maybe instead of sighing less, we should sigh more. Maybe instead of ending the sighing, we should redeem it. And I actually think that's what Mumford does in his lyrics. If you look at the rest of the song, Shakespeare is urging his hearers to forget about love. Love is your problem. You're attaching yourself to these people, and they're hurting you, so you need to let love go. But Mumford sees love as the key. And so do I. And so does Jesus. I mean, whether Jesus understood love from day one, from his birth, or whether he needed those teachers in his life to guide him into understanding of perfect love, ultimately, this is what we get from Jesus. And love doesn't tell us to sigh no more. Love redeems our sighs. And so to put a cap on that, I'm going to read the words in the song Sigh No More by Mumford & Sons that come to the climax. It almost feels like a rebuttal of what Shakespeare has said. They're putting it out there and saying, yeah, Shakespeare is saying to quit sighing. But here, it's a Jesus moment, right? You may have heard it said, sigh no more. But I say to you, love, it will not betray you, dismay, or enslave you. It will set you free. to be more like the one you were made to be. There is a design, an alignment, a cry of my heart to see the beauty of love as it was made to be.